we head into the newscast with the issue of the annexation of West Bank. More than 1,000 lawmakers from across Europe in a letter to European governments have recently said that any Israeli move to annex parts of the West Bank would be fatal for Middle East peace hopes and must be prevented. As Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has set July 1st as the date for the start of cabinet discussions on moving forward on annexation. This is in line with Trump's plan that envisages Israeli sovereignty over 30% of the West Bank and Palestinian statehood under strict conditions. For more on the story, we're joined by our guest, Arsen Ostrowski, who is an international human rights lawyer and Middle East expert. Let's quickly go across to Arsen. Arsen, thank you so much for joining us here on WION. Now, let me begin by asking you regarding the annexation of West Bank. A UN human rights expert, Michael Link, has stated, and let me quote him, "This would be a modern form of apartheid, a political anomaly in the 21st century." That's what he has to say with regards to the annexation. How do you respond to his statement?
Look, first of all, thank you for having me on. With respect to his statement, we have to bear in mind where it's coming from. This is the same UN Human Rights Council that just elected Venezuela. The same UN Human Rights Council has never passed a resolution condemning Russia, China, or Saudi Arabia. And the very same rapporteur, Michael Link, whose mandate is solely to report on alleged Israeli violations of human rights. Nothing about Palestinian human rights, nothing about Palestinian terror and incitement. So with all due respect to him, this is not exactly a great exemplar of human rights and expertise on the matter. With respect to the issue at hand, I think the first thing we need to do is put this in context. It is not annexation as is repeatedly being claimed. This is actually an application of Israeli sovereignty and Israeli law over the territories in the West Bank. This is not a territory that Israel acquired by force over another state. This was a territory that Israel reunited in 1967 in a defensive war, and territory that it has legitimate legal claims to, and which has never actually belonged to any Palestinian state. So that's something we need to put in context. But at the end of the day, it's in the Palestinian interest to actually move forward with this plan as envisaged under President Trump. It's a plan that for the first time actually gives them a realistic path to statehood, that actually allows for a path to the two-state solution, but one that also takes into account not only their legitimate rights, but also Israel's legitimate security concerns, and also the fact that the Jewish people do have very inextricable links to communities there.
Arsen, I'm a bit surprised that you're labeling this as something which is not annexation. Any amount of annexation, of course, is contrary to the UN Charter and a fundamentally illegal act. If it's so controversial, why does Israel want to do it, and what would change with annexation now?
Look, annexation is a very definitive concept in international law, which, as I explained a moment ago, which does not apply in this particular situation.
Why doesn't it apply?
Why? Because annexation refers to, first of all, land that is acquired by force by one state against another.
So what you're saying is that there's no use of force in what is going to happen on 1st of July?
I'm talking about if we go back to 1967 when Israel reunited these territories. It was not an act of war, but it was actually a self-defensive act in 1967. You have to remember when Israel was forced to fight against its very existence against 5 Arab armies that sought its destruction. Moreover, this has never been territory of a state of Palestine. In 1967, certainly there was no such entity as the state of Palestine. And I would go one further to actually say that today under international law, notwithstanding the PA's claims, Palestine does not fit the criteria of statehood. Therefore, the term annexation does not apply. And the proper label in this case is application of Israeli sovereignty or Israeli law to these territories.
Right. Okay. Arsen, just days ago, more than 1,000 parliamentarians from across Europe signed a letter strongly opposing plans by Israel to annex parts of the occupied West Bank. How can the international community, particularly the EU, ensure accountability from Israel on this issue? Can EU actually do that?
Look, my question is, why should the EU call for accountability only from Israel? What about accountability from our Palestinian neighbors? And that also goes to the heart of the issue. There are two sides to this, and the EU, unfortunately, has repeatedly singled out Israel for condemnation, whereas turning their back to a lot of the Palestinian crimes of aggression, a lot of the ongoing payments to terrorists, which are something like $400 million in aid, much of it coming from the EU. So the EU does have an important role to play in this, but the EU must be a far more honest broker when it comes to the Middle East conflict. With respect to moving forward, the EU is, as an entity, as a body, works on consensus. And at this point, there's 27 member states of the EU, which at this point do not have consensus in terms of how to proceed on this. There are a number of states who disagree with the manner in which Brussels wishes to issue threats and impose sanctions. So it appears that those elements are unlikely. There are other steps that the EU can take. At this stage, we have to also bear in mind that Israel has not done anything yet. This is only a discussion. So a lot of these threats and ultimatums are very much preliminary, very much too early in this stage. What I would hope that the international community would do, on the contrary, is to urge the Palestinians to come to the table. Time and time again, they have been given very, very generous offers and which have been rejected. As same has applied to this vision for peace as put forward by the Trump administration, which they've again rejected before they even saw it, and which offers them, for the first time, for both parties, a legitimate path to peace.
Well, it's interesting that you've just presented your perspective. Thank you for presenting your perspective, Arsen. And for now, as you said, these are discussions, but we'll have to wait and watch what happens on July 1st and how much of a discussion it is reduced to on July 1st. This is certainly going to have its own set of repercussions. We'll perhaps have a better discussion.